All right, welcome to 10 Good Minutes. This week's topic is the news media, and I have with me today someone I've known for quite a while, probably 10 years or so.
Long time, yeah.
Yeah, Ross Ramsey, who's with the Texas Tribune, is one of their lead reporters there and one of the principal architects of the Texas Tribune. Ross, do you want to describe what the Texas Trib is real briefly, kind of a setup?
It's a nonprofit online news organization that basically covers civics, government, politics, all the things we do in civic life. It's the biggest state house bureau of any news organization in the country, and we cover Texas government and, when necessary, American government.
Yeah. I would encourage you.
Truths, right?
Yeah, I would encourage you guys to take a look at the Texas Tribune website. It's a wonderful resource for Texas politics, elections, public policy, also just basic demographic information. It's a go-to site. A lot of innovative stuff, interesting podcasts, all sorts of really cool things. So Ross is going to talk today about the news media, and I wanted to ask just some kind of basic questions. You've been around a little bit of time,
right.
a little while.
That was gentle, thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to. We talk about seasoned citizens.
Right.
Yeah. So, could you kind of talk a little bit about how news coverage, whether it's with Texas or national politics, has changed, let's say, over the last 10 or 15 years? How's it different?
It's, everything's faster. I started in radio, and when I was in radio, we would do a 24-hour calendar, so news happened all the time. And it was weird in the news media at the time because TV stations had their 10 o'clock newscast and their 5 o'clock newscast, and they were geared for those times of the day. Newspapers were geared for a morning paper or an afternoon paper, and they were on a 24-hour cycle. So radio was this weird thing because we were always updating and always churning.
Yeah.
And we have come full circle. Now we're on the internet and we are all like radio. Everything is happening all the time. So when you call somebody and they say, what's your deadline? Instead of saying, well, I've got to have this by 6 o'clock, it's now.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest change.
Yeah. Could you speak to, I always thought it was kind of interesting that you had one possibility of something like the Tribune is that you can kind of report almost instantaneously when something breaks.
Right.
It can almost be like, the old AP wire.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you have opportunities for sort of long form journalism where you're not constrained by the physical limits of a newspaper. Do you think you guys have gone a long way towards realizing both those potentials, or which one has kind of worked better than the other?
Well, you have this automatic thing, like you say, of breaking news. Something happens, bang, you can put it on. So that's there. That's a little bit like old radio. If you were sitting next to your radio and somebody would break in, we're going to cut into this music because there's a hurricane coming or because there's been a car wreck or whatever it is. You also can, in this medium, put in front of all of your viewers or users or whatever you want to call them, all of the information that's on a reporter's desk. So since I started covering government, I've had this piece of information, all of the state salaries. In Texas, all of the state employee salaries, titles, agencies are public information. So you can look through and see where this senator's cousin is working and all of those kinds of things, or you can find out what the general counsel in that agency is making. It's a useful resource, and it's always been on my desk from the days when it was a big stack of paper to 5-inch floppy disks to thumb drives to now on the internet. And one of the things about starting a digital news organization is now I can put that information online in a usable form for anybody, any time of day, wherever they are in the state or in the country or in the world, and they have access to not just the news, the breaking things that are happening now and now and now, but also all of the information that underlies it, so they get a contextual set of information that wasn't available before.
Yeah. Let me ask kind of a related question. Given all this, the potential and some of which has been realized online, are physical newspapers, not to name names, but the LA Times, the Austin American Statement, are they dead?
I think I think that form of delivery is on its way out. When you start a publication, when we started the Texas Tribune and began talking about this, the delivery mechanism was a function of the time we were operating in. If we had done it 100 years ago, it would have been a newspaper. If we had done it 50 years ago, it might have been radio, might have been television, it might have been something else. But when you're starting something in this century, you're starting a digital publication because you don't have a giant printing press that costs millions of dollars. I don't have to have a network of trucks handing newspapers to a network of 12-year-olds on bicycles who are trying to hit your porch with a newspaper.
Right.
I don't have all of this industrial process that's involved in it. And that's part of it. Part of it is timeliness. If I take a newspaper, I get last night's baseball scores.
Right.
If I have this on the internet, I get the baseball scores when they happen. It's just an inefficient way, given our current technology, to deliver news.
Yeah, it's interesting the way, you talk about baseball scores. I mean, the local papers, for instance, increasingly don't give information that happens after 5 o'clock. It's almost like they're waving the white flag about timeliness.
Well, it's all driven, newspapers are driven by an industrial process. So you go backwards from, I want it to land on Daron Shaw's porch at 5 a.m. in the morning. Right. Okay, to do that, I have to let the truck go at 2 o'clock in the morning. To do that, I have to set the printing press so that it's done by 11 p.m. To do that, the reporter has to finish the story by 5 o'clock, and that's why there's a cutoff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, let me ask you a question sort of more about the interplay between politics and the news media. Are you concerned as a reporter, as a journalist, about kind of where the overall relationship is between our government officials and the news media? Is that something that you think about, that bothers you, that doesn't bother you?
I think about it, and it both bothers me and doesn't bother me. I mean, people in politics are super adaptive, and they're very, very quick to say, just give me any set of rules and I'll figure out how to work. So they adapt very quickly. But the faster information travels and the faster reactions come back, the less time you have for deliberation. So you have this weird sort of feedback loop that gets, it's just a hyper feedback loop. So it's very, very quick. So you can't look at something and say, well, let me think about this for a couple of days. Or let me consider this for a couple of weeks, or we're going to negotiate this treaty for a year. Some of these long treaties that govern trade and those kinds of things are years in the making. And if you're going to have this feedback loop that's constantly saying yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, no, barking at you, bouncing like the thing in the dock at the bottom of your computer, it's distracting, and it sometimes takes away from the process, and it sometimes takes away some of the options that might be available to decision makers who are being more deliberative, a little bit more considerate. We're going to go ahead and take a bullet on this because it's worth it for that. Sometimes those little short feedback loops mess things up. The other place where I think it does us a disservice is the lag time between political decision making and political reward is mismatched. So if I'm an office holder and I'm elected every 2 years, and I'm making a decision that in 2 years isn't going to make sense, but in 10 years is going to make a lot of sense, it's politically unprofitable for me to make that decision. Because I have to survive the next election, and even though I think this is a good, strong, positive, long-term thing, it'll cost me in the short run, and in the short run, that's where I'm surviving.
Right. So yeah, that's exactly right. Well, let me kind of ask you about your general attitude about sort of positive or negative about kind of how the role of journalism is evolving. I mean, we've talked a lot in the class about the role of the fourth estate, the press or the media as a check on governmental power. Do you think the media is doing a more effective job, a less effective job of serving that purpose in American society with all the technological developments and all the things that have changed the last 25 years, or do you think they're not doing as good a job? I mean, I realize we're asking about a lot of factors coming together at once, changes in politics, changes in the media, and changes in technology, but as they all collide together, what's your general attitude towards this? Or positive, negative?
General is positive, but there are big gaps in this. At the national level, I think it does a pretty good job. And I'll come back to that in a second. As you get down closer to local government, I think it does a poorer and poorer job. And this has to do really with the business of news. And local publications, local radio stations, local TV stations aren't as well funded for news as they used to be. So your coverage of city council and of county government and of school boards and things like that isn't nearly what it ought to be, and isn't nearly what it was just a minute ago, just a couple of years ago. So unless we figure that out and get that kind of coverage back in place, I think we're missing a lot there. At the national level, there's a lot of noise, but there's also a lot of signal. And when you look at this and say, generally, are we learning the things about the national government, about national affairs and civics that we ought to be learning? I think most of that is still out there, and I think that's pretty vibrant. The biggest change in the news business is we disintermediated editing. So we used to have, if you think of news like diet, we used to have, our news diet used to be set up so that you picked your cafeteria. It had professional dietitians, we called them editors, and they decided which of all of the things out there, all of the information out there was important and how to present it. And the internet gave us this opportunity to say, let's get rid of all of those filters. Let's get rid of all of that stuff. And we're still in the process of training everybody what they should and shouldn't eat. And when you first open the back of the cafeteria and say, have anything you want, the first thing you find out is everybody ate all the Twinkies. The worst information suddenly seemed to rise to the top. And we've had this period, and I think, optimistically, I think we're coming out of it. But we had this period where people were getting information and hadn't been trained really or educated in how to say, okay, I have a new piece of information. Is this good information? Is this bad information? There's an old motto in the news business: if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Be skeptical. You don't have to be cynical. She probably does, but you better check with Dad. Yeah. Right? Ask around. Check with your brother. Check with your sister. And there's a professional obligation in journalism to look at a new piece of information and say, that's interesting. Is it true? And poke at it and prod it. And if we're going to take those editors out of our news consumption loop, then we need to do that ourselves. And people are getting better at that, but it's a, sometimes painful process.
Excellent. Hey, well, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
That's Ross Ramsey, everybody. If you get a chance, check out the coverage of Texas and local politics on the Texas Tribune. And again, thanks to Ross for holding down 10 good minutes.